"You don't belong here. The help doesn't sit at the family table." My sister-in-law didn't whisper it. She said it at full volume in front of 14 people, with a smile on her face like she was complimenting the centerpiece. Then she picked up my place card, the one with my name on it in the calligrapher's gold ink that I had paid for, and moved it to the far end of the table next to the coatroom. The room went quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then everyone looked away and resumed their conversations. I didn't move. I didn't reach for the place card. I didn't look at my brother, who was standing 6 feet away refilling someone's glass and pretending he hadn't heard a single word. I looked at my watch. It was 4:47 p.m., I thought. By 5:15 she won't have a rehearsal dinner to sit at. But before I tell you how I legally dissolved my own brother's rehearsal dinner from the inside out, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I want to know how far this story gets. I didn't pick up my place card. I left it where she'd dropped it, slightly crooked against the breadbasket, and I walked to my original seat and sat down anyway. I smoothed the linen napkin across my lap. I picked up the menu. It was printed on heavy cardstock with a small embossed crest at the top, a design I had approved 3 months ago. My sister-in-law stared at me from across the table. She had the kind of beauty that required maintenance, the kind that came with a standing appointment every 6 weeks and a skincare routine she mentioned in conversation. Her dress was a pale champagne color that probably cost more than my first car. She had a way of looking at you like she was calculating your net worth in real time and finding the number insulting. "I'm serious," she said, not quite as loud this time, but loud enough. "This seating arrangement is for immediate family." "I am immediate family," I said. She laughed. It was the kind of laugh that isn't a laugh, it's a dismissal shaped like one. You know what I mean. I did. She meant the family that mattered, the family that had money, connections, a last name she was about to acquire. She had made it very clear in the 10 months since my brother proposed that I was a different category. I was the sister who lived in a starter home at 32, who drove a 4-year-old Subaru, who showed up to events in clothes that weren't designer, who worked in what she called some kind of property thing when she described me to her friends. That last part always made me want to smile. I never did. Some kind of property thing meant I had spent 9 years acquiring distressed commercial real estate in the mid-Atlantic region. I bought failing hospitality properties, restaurants drowning in debt, event venues facing foreclosure, boutique hotels that banks couldn't wait to get off their books. I bought them at pennies on the dollar, restructured them, repositioned them. Sometimes I flipped them, sometimes I held them. The Alderton House, the historic estate where my brother's rehearsal dinner was currently taking place, was one I held. I bought it 4 years ago when it was 6 months away from being converted into condominiums. The original owners had been in the family for 3 generations. They couldn't make the debt service. The bank was 2 weeks from filing. I stepped in, bought the note, restructured the financing, put 2 years into restoring the property, and reopened it as a private event venue 18 months ago. My brother knew I worked in real estate. He did not know I owned the building he was standing in. Nobody in my family did. I had reasons for that, and they weren't complicated. My brother, the charming one, the one with the easy smile and the ability to walk into any room and immediately locate the most important person in it, had a long history of locating my bank account at the same speed. Not directly. Always through my parents, always framed as a family thing, a temporary thing, a we'll pay you back thing. I had learned over the years that the more he knew about my financial situation, the more creatively he could access it, so I kept my mouth shut. I drove the Subaru, I wore the clothes I liked. I let them think what they thought. My sister-in-law had never questioned the story she'd constructed about me, because it was the story she needed. Every family gathering needs its contrast figure, the one who makes everyone else feel like they're doing well by comparison. I had been filling that role since my brother started dating her, and she had settled into it with the comfort of someone who has found their favorite seat. I looked around the room at the people I had never stopped feeling something complicated about. My parents were at the head of the table, glowing. My mother was in a dress she'd told me cost a fortune. I didn't ask how much of it was on a credit card that carried a balance they'd been managing for years. My father had his reading glasses pushed up on his head the way he always did at events, like he might need to review a document at any moment. He was laughing at something my brother's future father-in-law had said. He looked happy, genuinely happy, in the way that people look when they believe they've finally arrived somewhere. I had helped them get here. Not in a way they would have framed it that way. In a way that looked, from the outside, like I just kept writing checks when asked. The house they lived in, the one my brother had just referred to as the family home in his toast draft, which I had been forwarded for proofreading, carried a mortgage that had been restructured twice in the last 6 years. The second restructuring had been handled quietly through a holding company. My holding company. I had purchased their mortgage from the original lender when they were 4 months behind and facing a notice of default. I lowered the rate, extended the term, kept them in the house. They thought they'd gotten lucky with a refinancing offer that came in the mail. I sat across from my sister-in-law and watched her lift her champagne flute and take a slow, satisfied sip, and I thought about all the invisible scaffolding holding up the room around her, the building she was sitting in, the glasses her future in-laws were drinking from, the house where my brother grew up, and which she was already calling ours in conversation. All of it, in one way or another, ran through me. Not because I was generous, I want to be honest about that. I wasn't doing it out of the goodness of my heart. I was doing it because I was the one who could, and because there was a version of me, the version that existed before I understood what this family actually thought of me, that believed being useful was the same as being valued. It took me a long time to understand that those are not the same thing. I looked at my brother. He had finally made eye contact with me, a brief apologetic glance that communicated exactly what he was going to do about what just happened, which was nothing. He gave me a small shrug, a half smile. The expression of a man who has decided the path of least resistance is the only path worth walking. I had watched him make that calculation my entire life. When we were kids and I'd gotten blamed for something he'd done, he'd given me that same shrug. When I'd lent him money for his first business, and the business failed and the conversation about repayment somehow never happened, he'd given me that shrug. When he'd called me at 11 p.m., 18 months ago, needing a co-signature on a loan he hadn't told me the terms of until I was already on the phone with the lender, he'd given me that shrug when I'd said I needed to think about it, like my hesitation was the problem. The shrug was a whole language. I had finally become fluent. My sister-in-law had gone back to her conversation. She was telling a story. I could tell by the way she was holding her hands, shaping the air around her point, and the people around her were nodding, leaning in. She was good at that. She could hold a room. She had a gift for making people feel like they were being let in on something. I could see why my brother loved her. I could also see very clearly what she was. The venue manager appeared at my elbow. His name was Patrick, and he had been with Alderton House since about 8 months after I'd reopened it. He was the kind of person who solved problems before you knew they existed, and who communicated primarily through very small, precise facial expressions. Right now his expression was communicating something specific. He'd seen what happened with the place card. He'd been standing near the service entrance when it happened. "Everything all right?" he said quietly enough that only I could hear. "Fine," I said. "Should I not yet?" He nodded once and withdrew. I opened the menu again. The first course was a roasted beet and burrata salad with a champagne vinaigrette. I had worked with the chef on this menu for 6 weeks. I had approved the wine pairings. I had chosen the linens, ivory, not white because white photographed cold and this room was warm. I had signed the vendor contracts and reviewed the insurance and approved the parking management plan. I had done all of that because when my brother had called me 7 months ago and told me he'd found a venue he loved and asked if I thought he could get the rate down, I had quietly arranged exactly that. Not because I got a discount as the owner, that would have required telling him I was the owner, but because I told Patrick that this booking was personal and to handle the processing accordingly. My brother thought he'd gotten a deal because of his negotiating skills. He was very proud of that. My sister-in-law said something I didn't catch, and the table laughed. She looked at me as the laughter happened, a quick sideways glance, checking that I'd noticed I wasn't part of it. That was the thing about people like her. The cruelty wasn't incidental, it was deliberate, calibrated. She needed an audience, and she needed a subject, and I had been both for the better part of a year. I understood her logic. I had spent a lot of time thinking about it. When she looked at me, she saw risk that needed to be managed. A sister who might have influence, who had a history with my brother that predated her, who knew things about the family she didn't. The smartest move from her perspective was to establish early and clearly that I was not a peer, that I was beneath the social tier she was constructing. If she could get the family to treat me that way, if she could get my brother to treat me that way, she'd neutralized whatever threat I represented before I could become one. She wasn't wrong about the strategy. She was wrong about the target. She thought I was the girl in the thrift store blazer with the practical car and the vague real estate job. She didn't know that the girl in the thrift store blazer had structured a deal 6 months ago that returned a 31% annualized return, and that the practical car was paid for in full because I hadn't had a car payment in 4 years and saw no reason to start. She forgot or never bothered to learn that quiet people aren't always losing. Sometimes they're waiting. The first course arrived. I watched the servers move through the room, my staff, hired through the venue's hospitality contract, trained to a standard I had set. I watched them navigate the tables with the practiced ease of people who had been briefed well and paid fairly, which is the only way to get that kind of ease. I watched my sister-in-law snap her fingers at one of them without looking up from her conversation. That was the moment something in me settled, not anger. I want to be clear about that. It wasn't a hot feeling, it was the opposite. A cold, flat clarity, like the moment you've done the math on something and the numbers are finally undeniable. I had been carrying a ledger in my head for a long time, and sitting in this room, in this building, watching this woman snap her fingers at a member of my staff, the ledger finally closed. I thought about the year I drove 3 hours each way every other weekend to help my parents deal with the default paperwork. I thought about the Sunday nights I'd spent on calls with their lender, patient, precise, relentless, until I found the structure that worked. I thought about my brother's first business and the $22,000 I'd put in that I'd never discussed again, because the conversation would have cost us more than the money. I thought about the loan co-signature and the terms I hadn't liked and the thing I'd signed anyway, because he'd said he needed me, and I had not yet learned what that phrase meant when he said it. I thought about the night I'd sat in my car in the parking lot of a grocery store and cried because I'd just transferred money I'd earmarked for my own savings to cover an overdraft in my parents' account. And I'd been doing that kind of thing for so long that I couldn't actually remember the last time I'd made a financial decision that was only about me. The ledger wasn't a grudge. I want to be clear about that too. It was an accounting, there's a difference. I set down my fork. I opened the management app on my phone, the internal system we use to run the property, bookings, vendor coordination, staff scheduling. I navigated to the current event, Alderton House private events, rehearsal dinner booked under my brother's name, status, active. I scrolled to the contracts section. Clause 12, the conduct and service protocol. I had drafted it myself after an incident at an event 2 years ago when a guest had berated a server in a way that had been witnessed by half the room and had taken Patrick an hour to de-escalate. The clause gave property ownership the right to terminate an event with immediate effect if any client, guest, or affiliated party engaged in conduct that violated the dignity of the venue's staff or the terms of the hospitality agreement. Snapping your fingers at staff without acknowledgement was not the conduct violation in isolation, but combined with the public humiliation of a family member at the host table, it completed a picture I had been building since 4:47 p.m. I sent Patrick a text. It said 12C, host table. I'm handling it personally. I watched him across the room, read his phone. I watched him look up at me with an expression I'd never quite seen from him before. Not uncertainties exactly, but something close to careful attention. He nodded once. He touched his earpiece. I put my phone in my clutch. I stood up from the table. I didn't excuse myself. I walked to the center of the room, to the small raised platform near the fireplace where the microphone had been set up for the evening's toasts. I stepped up. The room didn't notice me immediately. I waited. I didn't tap the mic or say excuse me, or do any of the things that indicate you're unsure you have the right to be where you are. I just stood there, and after a few seconds, the conversations began to drop off in the way that conversations do when someone is standing somewhere unexpected and completely still. My sister-in-law saw me first. Her eyes went from neutral to sharp in about half a second. "What is she doing?" she said. She didn't try to keep her voice down. I picked up the mic. "Good evening," I said. "I'll keep this brief. She's not on the toast schedule." This from my brother looking at Patrick. This isn't a toast," I said. The room was fully quiet now, that particular kind of quiet that happens when people can sense that something real is about to occur. My sister-in-law stood up from the table. She had the posture of someone who has managed social situations before and was prepared to manage this one. "This is a private family event," she said, her voice the smooth, flat tone of someone demonstrating control. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but this isn't." "You're right that it's a private event," I said. "Private events at this property are governed by a hospitality agreement. I'd like to invoke Clause 12C of that agreement." Silence. "What does that mean?" someone said from the back of the room. "It means the event is being terminated," I said, "effective in 15 minutes. The room detonated." My sister-in-law's composure cracked. Not all the way. She was too practiced for that, but enough. "You cannot terminate a private event. You're a guest." "I'm not a guest," I said. "I'm the owner." That landed the way a stone lands in still water. The ripple went through the room visibly. "That's..." She looked at my brother, then back at me. "That's absurd. You don't own anything." "I own this building," I said. I pulled up the property records on my phone and connected to the room's display screen, a feature we'd installed for corporate presentations. The evening's slideshow of engagement photos disappeared and was replaced by the deed of trust. Owner of record, Harlow Property Holdings LLC. I was Harlow Property Holdings LLC. I purchased Alderton House in 2021. I restored and reopened it in 2023. Every piece of furniture in this room, every glass you're holding, the floor you're standing on, it belongs to me. My brother's face had gone through about 4 expressions in the span of 3 seconds. He landed on something that looked like disbelief, but had the specific texture of a man beginning to understand he'd significantly miscalculated something. He started. "That's not possible. Why would I not tell you?" I asked. He didn't answer. He knew why. Not consciously, maybe. But somewhere in him, he knew. This isn't about the venue, my sister-in-law said. She had recovered enough to switch strategies. Her voice had gone from confrontational to something more practiced, the measured tone of someone about to reframe a narrative. She looked at the room, not at me. This is about a family issue. She's been resentful of this relationship from the beginning. I'm sorry you're all witnessing this. It was a good move, I'll give her that. She was trying to turn the room. I could see people's faces shifting slightly, that particular human instinct to identify the unstable element and distance from it. My brother picked it up immediately. She does this, he said. She's always done this. Everything has to be about her. I let them finish. Then I looked at the display screen and swiped to the next document. It was the mortgage record for my parents' house. Borrower names. My parents' lender. Harlow Property Holdings LLC. Status. Current. Acquisition date. 4 years ago, transferred from the original bank after default. My mother made a sound I'd never heard her make before. I didn't buy it to hold it over you, I said, and I was talking to my parents now, not the room. I bought it because you were going to lose it, and I didn't want you to. I want to be clear about that. I looked at my father, who had gone very still. But I also want to be clear about something else. I swiped to the next document, my brother's business loan from 3 years ago, the co-signature. The current balance, still outstanding because the payment schedule had been restructured twice, and the principals had barely moved. I signed this, I said, and the $22,000 before it. And the transfer I made in 2020 that I said was a gift, but that I think we all know wasn't really, because gifts don't cost you sleep. I looked at my brother. I don't want the money back. I want you to understand what it cost. My brother's jaw was tight. You're doing this in front of everyone. You moved my place card in front of everyone, I said. You watched her do it and you looked at your drink. The room was absolutely silent. I'm invoking Clause 12C, I said again calmly. The conduct standard of this property requires that all guests treat staff and ownership with basic dignity. That standard was not met this evening. The event will conclude at 5:15. Your deposits are non-refundable per the signed contract, which I'm happy to provide a copy of. My staff will assist you with your personal belongings. My sister-in-law opened her mouth. Security will be available if you need assistance locating the exit, I said. She closed it. Patrick appeared at the edge of the room. 2 members of the venue's event security team were positioned near the main doors. Not threateningly. Just present. Doing their jobs, which was to ensure that the end of an event was orderly. The guests began to move. Some of them carefully didn't look at me. Some of them did, with expressions I couldn't fully categorize. Not quite respect, not quite pity. Something in between that I didn't spend a lot of time analyzing. My parents didn't move immediately. My mother was looking at me with an expression I couldn't read. My father had taken his glasses off his head and was holding them, which he only did when he was genuinely lost for what to do next. The house is still yours, I told them. I'm not changing that. But I need you to understand that I have been holding things up for a long time, and I have done it without acknowledgement, and I have done it while sitting at the children's table, and that stops now. My mother said my name. Just my name. No sentence attached. I know, I said. My brother made one more move. He crossed the room toward me, and for a moment I thought he was going to argue, and I had prepared for that. But he stopped about 3 feet away and just looked at me, and I saw something in his face that wasn't anger. It was more complicated than that. It was the face of someone who has just been shown an accurate mirror for the first time and isn't sure what to do with the reflection. You should have told me, he said, finally. Would it have changed anything? I asked. He didn't answer. That was its own answer. I stepped down from the platform. I handed the mic back to the stand. I walked to the bar, poured myself a glass of the Cab Franc we'd been serving, a small producer out of the Finger Lakes, a choice I'd made personally because I liked the winemaker's story, and I found a quiet chair near the fireplace. I sat down. Around me, the room emptied in the polite, slightly stunned way that rooms empty when they don't quite know what they've just witnessed. The catering staff moved efficiently, clearing the first course that most people hadn't finished. Patrick caught my eye from across the room and gave me the small, precise nod that meant everything was under control. My sister-in-law left without looking at me. She walked out with her head up, her hand through my brother's arm, her face arranged into an expression that said she was above the proceedings. She was good at that. She would probably be good at it for the rest of her life. My brother glanced back at me once from the doorway. I didn't look away. He did. The room was mine. It had always been mine. I had simply been the only one who knew. I thought about all the years of the ledger. The money, yes, but more than the money. The Sunday calls with lenders, the 3 a.m. transfers, the things I'd deferred for myself so there would be enough for everyone else. The version of me who had believed that if you just kept giving, eventually people would see you. They don't see you. Not until you make them. I finished the wine. I set the glass down on the side table, antique walnut, refinished, one of 14 I'd sourced from an estate sale in western Pennsylvania. I looked at the fireplace, which was original to the 1887 construction, restored at significant expense, currently burning a fragrant mix of apple and cherry wood. I had built this. Not the way people build things when they mean it as a metaphor. Literally. With contractors and permits and structural assessments and many long arguments about historically accurate mortar. I had done it quietly, the way I did most things, and I had opened it to the public and let people celebrate their important moments inside it. I had let my brother celebrate here too, and I didn't regret that. What I regretted was the belief that being the person who made things possible would ever be enough to make me the person worth protecting. I took out my phone. I had 3 missed calls, 2 from my brother, 1 from my mother, and several texts I didn't open yet. I opened the management app instead. I updated the event status. I made a note for the team. I sent Patrick a message thanking him for handling the evening with his usual steadiness. Then I sat for a while longer in the quiet that had settled over the room. There's a thing that happens when you stop making yourself small for people. It doesn't feel triumphant the way you might imagine. It doesn't feel like winning. It feels more like putting down something you've been carrying so long you forgot you were carrying it. Your arms ache in the specific way of something that has finally been set down. You stand a little differently. You breathe a little differently. The fire crackled. The staff finished clearing the room with the professional quiet of people who understood that the evening had been unusual and were giving me the space to sit in it. I thought about my brother's face in the doorway, about my mother saying my name like that with nothing attached, about my father and his glasses. I wasn't done with them. I want to be clear about that. The mortgage stood. The relationship was not over, but it was restructured, which in my line of work is sometimes the only honest option when the original terms are no longer serving anyone. Some things can't be forgiven their way back to normal. They have to be renegotiated. I knew how to do that. I had been doing it professionally for 9 years. I stood up. I smoothed my jacket, a blazer I had bought at a vintage store in Baltimore for $38 and which I genuinely loved, and I walked through the restored hallway of Alderton House toward the parking lot where my 4-year-old Subaru was waiting. The foundation doesn't need to announce itself. It just has to hold.